Well, if you take a look at the titles of the best-selling self-help books right now, you'll see that they all have something to do with becoming your authentic self. Titles like The Authentic Life, The Art of Authenticity, and Excavating the Authentic Self. It seems like everyone nowadays who is seeking to improve their lives wants to get in touch with their authentic selves. But what is the authentic self? Well, in today's gospel reading for the second Sunday in Lent, Jesus tells the first disciples that if they wish to follow him, they must deny their very selves. What did Jesus mean by this? Well, the self of which Jesus is speaking here is the false self. This is the self we must deny if we wish to awaken the true self, the Christ self, the authentic self. That's why in today's gospel reading, Jesus also tells the disciples that they must take up their cross each and every day. For the cross represents the death of the false self and the resurrection of the true self. Now, let me be clear. Jesus is not saying that we must suffer in order to follow him. But suffering is often a precursor to spiritual awakening. Sometimes it takes a job loss or a divorce, a medical diagnosis, or the death of a loved one in order for us to awaken more fully to the truth of our being. Oftentimes, when we think our lives are breaking down, we are actually on the cusp of enlightenment. Our breakdown is really a breakthrough. I've shared with you before the story of spiritual teacher Eckhart Tolle's awakening. He was going through a period of great depression and disillusionment with his life. One day he sat on a park bench alone, repeating over and over to himself, "I can't live with myself anymore. I can't live with myself anymore." And in that moment of breakdown, he experienced a breakthrough. He realized that if I can't live with myself anymore, then there must be two of me, the I and the self, with which it could no longer live. Since he knew he was only one person, Eckhart Tolle realized that one of those selves had to be false. And in that moment of realization, he came to understand, just as Jesus and all the great spiritual teachers did, that in order for us to live lives of peace, joy, abundance, and freedom, then we must deny or die to the false self so that we can resurrect the authentic self, the true self, the divine self, capital S. When we start to awaken spiritually, we begin to realize that the small self, the false self, is just an illusion, that we're not what we do or even what we think. The truth of our being is much greater than that, and the spiritual journey is all about the discovery of that greatness. But sadly, Jesus' instructions in today's gospel passage about denying the self and taking up your cross have been so misunderstood by Christians over the years. My mother, for example, was an extremely devout Christian, and whenever she had disappointments in her life, she would say, "Well, this is the cross God gave me to bear." My mother, like many Christians, seemed to think that misery and suffering are sent by God, and enduring them makes you a good Christian martyr. And over the years, I've also heard from many gay and lesbian Christians who said that they married someone of the opposite sex or remained celibate because of today's gospel reading, that they repressed their true nature because they heard Jesus say, deny yourself and take up your cross if you want to follow me. And so they saw their sexuality as a cross they had to bear in order to be a good Christian. And many of us who grew up in the Christian church were taught that the season of Lent was a time of suffering, a time to give up the things which bring us joy, as somehow all that suffering and repression would bring us closer to God. It reminds me of the Christians of old who wore hair shirts or who whipped themselves because they believed that pain and suffering would bring them closer to the presence of God. Do you believe that? Do you believe that Jesus in today's gospel passage is telling you that he wants you to suffer and repress yourself and not live a life of joy in order to follow him? I think Jesus is saying just the opposite here. I think Jesus is saying, as he did in John chapter 10, verse 10, I have come so that you may have life and have it more abundantly. I think Jesus is saying, come, follow me, so that you may experience life to the full, a rich, authentic life, full of joy and peace and freedom and abundance. You see, my friends, when Jesus is talking about denying yourself, he's not telling you to deny the things that bring you joy, but to deny the things that are keeping you from your joy, that are getting in the way of your living a rich, full, authentic life. I think Reverend Polly Moore said it perfectly in our words of integration and guidance today. She said, when Jesus said, deny thyself, what he meant was negate and thus undo the illusion of self. I know that that is a very difficult concept to understand, but I believe it is the key to our spiritual awakening. During a difficult time in my own life, I was led to discover the writings of the medieval Christian mystic known as John of the Cross. And his words, which awakened me, were, I have abandoned all I ever sought to be, and in dying, my spirit has been set free. Now, he obviously wrote that while he was still alive, so he wasn't talking about physical death. He was saying that our small self, our ego self, has to die in order for us to truly live. That's why Jesus in today's gospel says, those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life will save it. That's the purpose of the Lenten season, to prepare ourselves for this death and resurrection and new life. The purpose of Lent is to give up or let go of the illusion of the false self, so that you may more fully experience the magnificence of your true self. For the truth of your being is that you and the Father, you and the Mother are one. Not two, one. When you know this truth, really know it, and start living from it, you become free to be all that God has created you to be.